Jade Harrison stared at her laptop screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard like a pianist about to perform the most important piece of her life. The coffee shop around her buzzed with the usual morning chaos, but she felt completely alone. In her bubble of nervous energy, her savings account showed $37. Her rent was due in 5 days. And this job application might be her last real chance at escaping the endless cycle of part-time work and broken dreams. She had spent 3 hours crafting the perfect email to Cross Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in New York. The marketing coordinator position wasn't glamorous, but it was her foot in the door to the career she had always wanted. Jade double-checked the email address she had written down on a crumpled piece of paper, squinting at her own handwriting. The coffee shop's Wi-Fi was spotty. She was already running late for her shift at the bookstore. A simple typo, life-changing moment. In her rush, Jade typed what she thought was the HR email address, but her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Muscle memory taking over as she attached her resume and cover letter. The email she meant to send was destined for HR@crossdynamics.com. But in her haste, she typed CEO@crossdynamics.com instead. One wrong letter, one moment of distraction, and her carefully crafted application landed directly in the inbox of Damien Cross himself. She hit send at exactly 9:47 a.m., closed her laptop with a satisfied sigh, and rushed off to work completely, unaware that she had just made the most fortunate mistake of her life. The man at the top 30 floors above the bustling streets of Manhattan, Damien Cross, sat in his glass-walled office, reviewing quarterly reports that would make most people's heads spin. At 32, he had built Cross Dynamics from a small startup into a billion-dollar empire. But success had come at a price. His days were filled with board meetings, conference calls, and decisions that affected thousands of employees. Personal relationships had become casualties of his ambition, and he couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him without wanting something in return. His assistant Victoria Sterling knocked gently before entering, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She was everything one would expect from a top-tier executive assistant, polished, efficient, and completely devoted to maintaining Damien's carefully structured world. "Your 10 a.m. meeting has been moved to 11, Victoria announced, placing a stack of documents on his desk. "And there are several emails that need your immediate attention." Damien nodded without looking up, his eyes still focused on the financial projections. It was then that he noticed an email that didn't belong in his usual morning briefing. The subject line read, "Application for Marketing Coordinator Position, Jade Harrison." An unexpected discovery curiosity got the better of him. In his years as CEO, Damien had never received a job application directly. His finger hovered over the delete button for a moment, but something made him click open instead. Maybe it was the simplicity of the subject line, or maybe it was the fact that someone had actually managed to reach him directly in a world where every communication was filtered through layers of assistants and protocols. The email began with, "An apology. I hope this email finds you well, and I apologize if this isn't the right address." There was something refreshingly honest about those words. No corporate jargon, no buzzwords designed to impress, just genuine human uncertainty. As Damien continued reading, he found himself drawn into Jade's story. She wrote about growing up in a small town where opportunities were scarce, about working multiple jobs to pay for college, about dreams that seemed too big for her circumstances but too important to abandon. Her writing had a warmth that was completely absent from the set, hundreds of polished resumes he saw each month. "I know I don't have the experience that other candidates might have," Jade had written, "but I have something that can't be taught in business school. Genuine passion for creating connections between people and brands. I believe that every product has a story, and every customer deserves to feel like that story speaks to them personally." The decision that surprised everyone, Damien leaned back in his leather chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was an expression that Victoria would later describe as completely out of character. He hadn't smiled during a business day in months, maybe years. But there was something about Jade's words that reminded him of why he had started Cross Dynamics. In the first place, not for the money or the power, but because he had believed in the possibility of creating something meaningful. Without hesitation, he hit reply and began typing. Ms. Harrison, you sent this to the right address after all. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please come to the executive floor of Cross Dynamics. Ask for me personally." He paused before adding, "Bring nothing but yourself and your ideas." The phone call that changed everything. Jade was shelving romance novels when her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen and nearly dropped the book she was holding. An email from Damien Cross. The Damien Cross. Her hands trembled. As she opened the message, reading it once, twice, 3 times before the words finally sank in, she looked around the quiet bookstore, half expecting someone to jump out and tell her this was all an elaborate prank. But the email was real, and tomorrow at 2 p.m., she would be walking into the office of one of the most powerful men in the city, her coworker. Emma noticed her stunned expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Everything okay?" Jade turned her phone screen toward Emma, who read the email with wide eyes. "Oh my God, Jade. Do you realize what this means? This is like winning the lottery and getting struck by lightning at the same time." Preparation and panic that evening, Jade sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by every business article she could find about Damien Cross and his company. She learned that he had started Cross Dynamics at 25 with nothing but a laptop and an idea. The company now employed over 10,000 people and had revolutionized how businesses approach digital marketing and customer engagement. But the more she read, the more intimidated she became. What could someone like her possibly offer to someone like him? She was just a small-town girl with big dreams and a tendency to make mistakes like sending emails to the wrong address. Her roommate Sophie found her at midnight, still hunched over, her laptop with empty coffee cups scattered around her like evidence of her panic. "You need to sleep," Sophie said gently. "Tomorrow, you need to be yourself. The same person who wrote that email that caught his attention in the first place." The morning of Jade woke up 3 hours before her alarm, her stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and terror. She stood in front of her closet for 30 minutes, trying to decide what someone wears to meet a billionaire CEO, and they own exactly 2 professional outfits. She chose a simple black dress that made her feel confident without trying too hard, to be someone she wasn't. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she remembered her mother's words from years ago. "Confidence isn't about being perfect, sweetheart. It's about being genuine." The building that touched the sky, the Cross Dynamics building, dominated the Manhattan skyline like a glass and steel monument to ambition. As Jade stood on the sidewalk, craning her neck to see the top, she felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. But she also felt something else, a spark of determination that had carried her through every challenge she had ever faced. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with waterfalls cascading down the walls and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's cars. Jade approached the reception desk, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "I have an appointment with Mr. Cross," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly. Very few people had direct appointments with the CEO. "Name, please." "Jade Harrison." After a brief phone call, the receptionist directed her to a private elevator that would take her directly to the executive floor. As the doors closed and the elevator began its ascent, Jade took a deep breath and reminded herself that she had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The meeting that started it all, the executive floor, was a study in understated luxury. Windows offered breathtaking views of the city, and the air itself seemed to hum with the energy of important decisions being made. Victoria Sterling greeted Jade with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Cross will see you now," Victoria said, leading her down a hallway lined with awards and photographs of Damien with various world leaders and celebrities. The office doors opened, and Jade found herself face to face with the man who had built an empire. But the first thing that struck her wasn't his success or his expensive suit. It was his eyes. They held a depth that spoke of someone who had achieved everything he had ever wanted, but was still searching for something he couldn't quite name. "Ms. Harrison," Damien said, standing and extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." As their hands touched, both of them felt something electric pass between them, a connection that neither had expected and neither could deny. The handshake. lasted a moment longer than it should have, and when their eyes met, the carefully constructed walls of the corporate world seemed to melt away. "Please call me Jade," she said, her nervousness evaporating in the warmth of his smile. "Then you must call me Damien," he replied, gesturing toward a seating area away from his imposing desk. "I think we have quite a bit to discuss." As they sat down together, both of them knew that this was no ordinary job interview. This was the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. The accidental email had been sent. The meeting had been arranged. Destiny was about to unfold in ways that neither of them could have ever imagined. The conversation between Jade and Damien flowed like water, finding its natural course. What had started as a formal job interview quickly transformed into something deeper, more personal. Damien found himself asking questions he had never asked any candidate before. It's not about quarterly reports or marketing strategies, but about dreams, fears, and the moments that shape a person's character. "Tell me about the last time you failed at something," Damien said, leaning forward slightly in his chair. The afternoon sun streamed through the massive windows, casting golden light across the room. Jade considered the question carefully. Most people would have prepared a safe answer, something that sounded like a failure, but was really a disguised strength. But something about Damien's genuine curiosity made her want to be completely honest. "Last year, I tried to start my own small marketing consulting business," she began, her fingers unconsciously playing with the hem of her dress. "I had saved up enough money for 3 months of expenses, created a business plan, even designed my own website. I was so focused on making everything perfect that I forgot to actually find clients. By the time I realized my mistake, my savings were gone, and I had to move back in with my roommate and take on extra shifts at the bookstore." Damien nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "What did you learn from that?" "Experience. That perfection is the enemy of progress," Jade replied without hesitation, "and that sometimes the best opportunities come from taking imperfect action rather than waiting for the perfect moment." Something in Damien's chest tightened at her words. He had built his entire empire on the pursuit of perfection, on controlling every variable and minimizing every risk. But here was this woman, sitting in his office because of a mistake, teaching him about the value of imperfection. The offer that surprised them both. "I'm going to be honest with you," Damien said, standing and walking toward the window. "The marketing coordinator position has already been filled. Should have mentioned that earlier." Jade's heart sank, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. Of course, it was too good to be true. She had been foolish to think that one accidental email could change her entire life. But then Damien turned back to her, his eyes bright with something she couldn't quite identify. "However, I have a different proposition for you. I've been thinking about creating a new position, something that doesn't exist yet in our company structure. A director of authentic engagement, someone who can help us connect with our customers on a human level rather than just a transactional one." Jade blinked, certain she had misheard. "You want to create a position for me?" "I want to create a position with you," Damien corrected. "This would be uncharted territory for both of us. You would work directly with me to develop new strategies for customer connection. But more than that, you would help me remember what it feels like to build something meaningful rather than just profitable." The offer was beyond anything Jade had ever imagined. As she looked at Damien, she realized that this wasn't just about a job anymore. There was something happening between them, something that made the air in the room feel charged with possibility. "When would I start?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow, if you're willing," Damien replied. "But I should warn. You working directly with me means long hours, high expectations, and probably more scrutiny than you're used to." Jade stood up, extending her hand toward him. "Mr. Cross, you have yourself a deal." When their hands met this time, neither of them pulled away immediately. The handshake became something more intimate, a connection that spoke of shared ambition and mutual attraction. The first day of Everything's Jade arrived at Cross Dynamics the next morning, 30 minutes early, her stomach flutter with nervous energy. She had spent the previous evening researching everything, She could about the company's current marketing strategies and customer engagement metrics. But as she stood in the lobby, she realized that all the preparation in the world couldn't have readied her for what was about to happen. Victoria. Sterling was waiting for her by the elevators, her smile as polished and professional as her perfectly styled hair. "Miss Harrison?" she said with cool politeness. "Mr. Cross is expecting you. I'll show you to your new office." As they rode the elevator to the executive floor, Victoria's demeanor remained friendly but distant. "You'll be working very closely with Mr. Cross," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "I hope you understand the level of discretion that requires." Jade nodded, sensing there was more to Victoria's words than simple professional advice. "Of course. Take confidentiality very seriously." "I'm sure you do," Victoria replied, her smile never wavering, even as her eyes conveyed a subtle warning. The office next. Jade's new office was smaller than Damien's, but still more luxurious than anywhere she had ever worked. The walls were glass, offering a clear view into Damien's office, and vice versa. As she settled in at her new desk, she caught him watching her through the transparent barrier. When their eyes met, he smiled and mouthed welcome to the team. The first week passed in a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and late-night conversations that stretched far beyond business hours. Jade found herself staying later and later, not because the work demanded it, but because she genuinely enjoyed Damien's company. He was brilliant and driven, but underneath his corporate exterior, she glimpsed moments of vulnerability that made her heart race. One evening, as the rest of the office emptied out, Damien knocked on her office door. "Have you eaten dinner?" he asked, loosening his tie slightly. Jade looked up from her computer, realizing she hadn't thought about food in hours. "I was planning to grab something on the way home." "There's a small Italian place a few blocks away," Damien said, his usual confidence wavering slightly. "They have the best carbonara in the city. Would you like to join me? We could discuss the Johnson account over dinner." The invitation was framed as business, but the way Damien's eyes lingered on her face suggested it was anything but professional. Dinner in dangerous territory, the restaurant was intimate and dimly lit, with candles flickering on every table and the soft murmur of conversation creating a romantic atmosphere. As they shared a bottle of wine and talked about everything except work, Jade began to see a different side of Damien. Away from the corporate environment, he was funny, thoughtful, and surprisingly humble about his success. "Sometimes I feel like I built this company so fast that I forgot to enjoy any of it," he admitted, swirling the wine in his glass. "Every achievement just became a stepping stone to the next goal, and before I knew it, I was at the top of a mountain, but I was completely alone." Jade felt her heart soften at his honesty. "Loneliness is the price of success, isn't it?" "It doesn't have to be," Damien said, his gaze meeting hers across the table. "I'm starting to think that maybe I've been approaching success all wrong." Conversation grew more personal as the evening progressed. Jade told him about her childhood in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, about her parents who had worked multiple jobs to support her dreams, about the fear that she would never be good enough for the life she wanted to build. "You're already good enough," Damien said softly, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "You're more than good enough. You're extraordinary." The touch of his hand sent electricity through Jade's entire body. She knew they were crossing a line, moving from professional to personal in a way that could complicate everything. But as she looked into his eyes, she couldn't bring herself to care about the consequences. The morning after revelations, the next morning, the atmosphere in the office was charged with unspoken tension. Jade tried to focus on her work, but she found herself constantly aware of Damien's presence in the next office. Every glance through, the glass wall felt loaded with meaning. Every brief conversation carried undertones of the intimacy they had shared the night before. Victoria noticed the change immediately. She had worked for Damien for 3 years and had never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at Jade. During their usual morning briefing, Victoria's observations were sharp and pointed. "You seem distracted lately," she commented, placing his schedule on his desk with more force than necessary. "I'm fine, Victoria," Damien replied, not looking up from his computer. Of course you are," she said, her tone carrying a subtle edge. I just hope you remember that mixing business with personal matters can have complicated consequences. Damien finally looked up, his expression cool and controlled. Is there something specific you want to say? Victoria smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. It's just that I care about your reputation and the company's stability. I would hate to see either compromised by poor judgment. Clear, and Damien felt a flash of irritation. But before he could respond, Victoria had already left his office, her heels clicking against the marble floor with military precision. Secret, moments, and growing attraction, despite Victoria's subtle warnings and the potential complications, Jade and Damien found themselves drawn together like magnets. Their working relationship provided the perfect cover for spending hours together. But their conversations increasingly ventured into personal territory. During a late-night strategy session, Jade found herself sitting closer to Damien than strictly necessary, their shoulders touching as they reviewed presentation slides. The scent of his cologne was intoxicating, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. This campaign concept is brilliant, Damien said, his voice low and slightly husky. How did you come up with the emotional connection angle? I just thought about what would make me feel something, Jade replied, turning to face him. They were so close now that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Damien's hand moved to brush a strand of hair from Jade's face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her lips parting slightly as she waited for what felt inevitable. But the sound of Victoria's heels in the hallway broke the spell, and they pulled apart just as she appeared in the doorway. I didn't realize you were both still here, Victoria said, her eyes taking in their close proximity with obvious disapproval. It's quite late. Perhaps it would be better to continue this tomorrow when you're both fresh. The interruption felt deliberate, and Jade couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria was watching them more closely than ever. The weekend that changed everything that Friday. Damien made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of their usual business dinner, he invited Jade to spend Saturday at his penthouse, ostensibly to work on a major presentation in a more relaxed environment. His penthouse was a reflection of his success. Modern, elegant, and slightly cold. But as Jade walked around the space, she noticed small, personal touches that revealed the man behind the CEO persona. Books of poetry on the shelf, a guitar in the corner that looked well-loved. Photographs of family members who clearly meant the world to him. I didn't know you played guitar, Jade said, running her fingers along the instrument's strings. Haven't in years, Damien admitted, joining her by the window that offered a spectacular view of the city. I used to write songs when I was younger before I got caught up in building the company. Play something for me, Jade said impulsively. Damien hesitated, then picked up the guitar with surprising tenderness. His fingers found the familiar chords, and he began to play a melody that was both beautiful and melancholy. When he started to sing, his voice was rich and warm, completely different from his usual business tone. Jade felt tears prick her eyes as she listened. The song was about dreams deferred and chances not taken, about the price of success and the longing for connection. When he finished, the silence that followed was profound. That was beautiful, she whispered, moving closer to him. I wrote it. During my first year in business, Damien said softly. When I was scared, I was losing myself in the pursuit of success. Are you still scared? Jade asked, reaching up to touch his face. Not when I'm with you, he replied, his arms coming around her waist. This time. There was no interruption, no sound of heels in the hallway to break the moment. When their lips met, it was with the passion of two people who had been fighting their attraction for weeks. The kiss was tender and urgent, filled with all the words they hadn't been able to say. As they broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jade knew that everything had changed. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and whatever happened next would determine not just their professional future, but their personal destiny as well. This changes everything, Damien said, his forehead resting against hers. No, Jade replied, her heart racing with excitement and fear. Are you ready for that? Damien's answer was another kiss, deeper and more passionate than the first. And Jade knew that they were both ready to face whatever consequences their love might bring. Monday. Morning arrived with a tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the Cross Dynamics building. Jade and Damien tried to maintain their professional facade, but the chemistry between them was impossible to completely hide. Their stolen glances across the conference room during the weekly staff meeting didn't go unnoticed, especially by Victoria, who watched their every interaction with the sharp eyes of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. After the meeting, Jade returned to her office to find an anonymous note slipped under her door. The message was simple but chilling. Office romances never end well. Be careful who you trust. There was no signature, but Jade didn't need one to know who had left it. Her hands trembled slightly as she crumpled the paper and threw it away. But the warning echoed in her mind throughout the day. Victoria had been with Cross Dynamics since its early days, and she had built her entire identity around being indispensable to Damien. She had watched him date socialites and fellow CEOs, relationships that were more about networking than genuine connection. But what she saw developing between Damien and Jade was different, deeper, and infinitely more threatening to the carefully constructed world she had built around herself. The plan takes shape that evening. Victoria stayed late in her office, scrolling through employee files and company policies with the methodical precision of someone planning a military campaign. She had always been brilliant at finding weaknesses and exploiting them, skills that had made her invaluable to Damien over the years. Now, she was preparing to use those same skills against the woman who threatened everything she had worked for. Jade's personnel file was thin, but revealing. Small-town background, state university education, limited corporate experience. More importantly, Victoria discovered something that could be useful. During Jade's first week, there had been some confusion about her security clearance level. She had accidentally been given access to confidential client information that should have been restricted. It was a minor administrative error that had been quickly corrected, but in the right hands, could be made to look like deliberate misconduct. Victoria smiled to herself as she printed out the relevant documents. Sometimes the best weapons were hiding in plain sight. A perfect evening interrupted meanwhile. Jade and Damien were sharing dinner at a small French bistro tucked away from the main business district. They had been careful to choose restaurants where they were unlikely to encounter colleagues or business associates, but the secrecy was beginning to wear on both of them. "I hate this," Jade said suddenly, setting down her wine glass with more force than intended. Damien looked up from his meal, concern creasing his features. "Hate what?" "Hiding," she replied, her voice heavy with frustration. "Pretending that what we have isn't real, acting like professionals, when all I want to do is hold your hand in public and not care who sees us." Damien reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I know it's difficult, but we need to be careful. The business world can be cruel to relationships like ours. People will say you're only successful because of me. I can't bear the thought of anyone diminishing your accomplishments. But what if I don't care what they say?" Jade asked, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What if I'm tired of being afraid?" Before Damien could answer, his phone buzzed with an urgent text message. His expression darkened as he read it, and Jade felt her stomach drop. "What is it?" she asked. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning," Damien said grimly. "Drea says there's been a serious security breach, and the board wants answers immediately." The Trap Springs the boardroom felt like a courtroom as Jade sat at the long mahogany table, facing a panel of stern-faced executives who looked at her with barely concealed hostility. Victoria sat at the far end, her expression carefully neutral. But Jade could see the satisfaction lurking in her eyes. "Ms. Harrison," the board chairman began, his voice formal and cold, "we've discovered some irregularities in your access to confidential client information during your first week with the company." Gosh. Jade's heart began to race as Victoria slid a folder across the table toward her. Inside were printouts of emails and file access logs that had been carefully selected and arranged to paint a picture of deliberate misconduct rather than administrative error. "These documents suggest that you accessed classified client data without proper authorization," another board member continued. "Data that includes sensitive financial information and strategic planning details." "That was a mistake," Jade said. her voice stronger than she felt. My security clearance was incorrectly configured during setup. As soon as I realized the error, I reported it to IT, and it was immediately corrected. The IT department has no record of you reporting any such error, Victoria interjected smoothly, producing another document. In fact, their logs show that you continue to access restricted files for several days after the initial incident. Jade stared at the falsified records in disbelief. She knew she had reported the error, but somehow all evidence of her communication with IT had vanished. The trap had been laid perfectly, and she was caught in it. Damien's choice. Damien watched the proceedings with growing anger, recognizing Victoria's handiwork in every carefully crafted accusation. When the board suggested immediate termination for security violations, he knew he had reached a crossroads that would define not just his professional future, but his personal integrity. Before any decision is made, Damien said, standing slowly, I think there are some things the board needs to know. Victoria's eyes flashed with alarm as Damien moved to stand behind Jade's chair, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Jade Harrison is not just an employee of this company, Damien continued, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. She's someone I care about deeply, someone who has brought more innovation and authentic connection to our work in 2 months than we've seen in years. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Several board members exchanged glances. Victoria's carefully constructed mask finally slipped, revealing the fury beneath. The charges against Ms. Harrison are based on manipulated evidence, Damien continued. I have the original IT communications that prove she reported the security error immediately and acted with complete integrity throughout the process. He pulled out his own folder, containing emails and logs that Victoria had thought she had successfully deleted. What I find more interesting is how someone with administrative access to our systems was able to alter employee records and communications. That suggests a security breach far more serious than anything Ms. Harrison is accused of. The truth revealed as Damien presented the evidence of Victoria's manipulation. The board's attention shifted from Jade to the woman who had orchestrated the entire situation. Victoria's years of loyal service couldn't outweigh the severity of falsifying employee records and attempting to frame an innocent colleague. You've destroyed your own career trying to destroy mine, Jade said quietly, looking directly at Victoria. Why? Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. Because you don't belong here, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. You think you can just waltz into our world and take everything I've worked for? Damien was mine long before you sent your pathetic little email. The confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud, revealing the jealousy and possessiveness that had driven Victoria's actions. Security was called to escort her from the building, and as she passed Jade's chair, she leaned down and whispered, This isn't over. Love in the light, with Victoria's schemes exposed and her employment terminated. The cloud of suspicion over Jade lifted completely. The board not only cleared her of all charges, but commended her for the innovative work she had brought to the company. More importantly, Damien's public support had sent a clear message about where his loyalties lay. That evening, instead of hiding in secluded restaurants, Damien took Jade to the most exclusive rooftop bar in the city, where they were certain to be seen by colleagues and business associates. As they stepped onto the terrace, overlooking the glittering cityscape, Jade felt like she could breathe freely for the first time in weeks. Are you sure about this? She asked, noting the familiar faces already turning in their direction. Never been more sure of anything in my life, Damien replied, pulling her into his arms right there on the crowded terrace. I'm tired of hiding how I feel about you. I love you, Jade Harrison, and I want everyone to know it. The kiss they shared was witnessed by half the business elite of the city, and by morning their relationship would be the subject of countless news articles and social media posts. But as they held each other under the stars, none of that mattered. 6 months later, the Cross Dynamics annual gala was the event of the year. Held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel, Jade moved through the crowd with confidence that had been earned rather than given. Her innovative customer engagement strategies having generated record profits for the company in industry recognition that had nothing to do with her relationship. With Damien, she wore a stunning emerald green gown that complemented her eyes, and the engagement ring on her finger caught the light as she gestured during animated conversations with clients and colleagues. The ring had been Damien's grandmother's, family heirloom that spoke of tradition and lasting love rather than flashy displays of wealth. Damien watched her from across the room, marveling at how naturally she commanded respect and admiration. She had not only proven herself professionally, but had brought a warmth and humanity to Cross dynamics that had transformed the company culture entirely. The proposal that started it, almost the evening reached its peak. Damien took the stage too, addressed the crowd. His speech began as a traditional corporate address, thanking employees and celebrating achievements. 2 years ago, he said, his eyes finding Jade in the crowd, I received an email that was sent to the wrong address. That mistake led me to the most important discovery of my life, not just professionally, but personally. He stepped down from the podium and walked directly to Jade, the crowd parting before him like water. When he reached her, he took her hands in his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. Jade, you taught me that the best things in life come from taking chances, from being open to the unexpected, from choosing love over fear. You've made me a better man and a better leader. Then, to the gasps and applause of the crowd, Damien dropped to one knee, pulling out a velvet box that contained a ring that sparkled like captured starlight. Will you marry me? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Through tears of joy, Jade said yes, and the ballroom erupted in celebration. As Damien slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply, flashbulbs went off around them, capturing the moment that would grace the cover of every business magazine in the country. The perfect ending. 1 year later, wedding was featured in Architectural Digest as the perfect blend of elegance and intimacy. They exchanged vows in a garden ceremony at Damien's family estate, surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues who had witnessed their love story unfold. In her wedding speech, Jade thanked everyone for their support, but she saved her most. Heartfelt words for last. They say that love finds you when you least expect it. I was just a girl from a small town looking for a job, and I found so much more than I ever dreamed possible. Sometimes the best things in life come from the mistakes we make, the chances we take, and the courage to believe that we deserve extraordinary love. Damien's response was equally moving. I built a company, but Jade built a home in my heart. She taught me that success without love is just an empty achievement, and that the greatest risk is not taking the chance to love someone completely. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, with the stars twinkling overhead and their future stretching endlessly before them, both Jade and Damien knew that sometimes the wrong email address leads to exactly the right place. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Cross Dynamics headquarters now featured a dedicated wing for the Authentic Engagement Division. With Jade serving as Vice President of Customer Connection, her innovative approaches had revolutionized how businesses thought about customer relationships, and she was frequently invited to speak at conferences around the world. Their twin children, Emily and James, spent their afternoons in the company daycare center that Jade had convinced Damien to establish, bringing even more warmth and humanity to the corporate environment. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the business world was temporarily forgotten, Jade and Damien would often laugh about how a simple typo had changed their entire lives. They kept a framed copy of that original email in their home office, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unexpected mistakes. And sometimes, late at night when Damien played his guitar and sang the songs he had rediscovered through Jade's encouragement, they would remember that love really can conquer all, and that the best things in life are worth fighting for, worth believing in, and worth building a lifetime around.